Good evening and welcome to Q&A. We're live at the Brisbane Powerhouse. I'm Tony Jones and answering your questions tonight, Labor member for Griffith, Terry Butler. The leader of the Greens, Richard Di Natale. Independent Senator for South Australia, Nick Xenophon. The Minister for Trade, Steve Ciobo. And Independent Senator for Tasmania, Jackie Lambie. Please welcome our panel. Thank you, and as usual, you can watch Q&A live across Australia on ABC TV, News 24, or you can listen on News Radio. We're also streaming Q&A live on Facebook, and we hope we've ironed out some of the wrinkles from last week. So go to our Facebook page to watch, comment, or ask a question. And we go straight to our first audience question right now. It's from Donna Byrne.
When I first voted, there were federal politicians like Bob Hawke and Malcolm Fraser, and in Queensland we had politicians like Sir Joe and Tom Burns. You might not have liked them, but they told you what they thought. They made mistakes and we all moved on. Now we have politicians who have media advisors, image advisors, people to tell them what to wear. I'm just wondering how we're going to get politicians who truly represent us when we can't even get a genuine leaders debate because people seem so very worried about telling us what they really think and they're very risk adverse. How do you suggest that we get leaders who are true people?
Nick Xenophon, and don't say vote for me.
I wasn't going to say that. Nobody tells me what to wear. I'm still wearing my $99 suit tonight. It's very hot.
What, the suit or yourself?
The suit.
It is Queensland.
Oh, dear.
Can I say I think Australians have got a pretty good bull dust detector and they haven't lost that. I saw the leaders' debate last night. Unlike I forced myself to watch the whole thing, it seems as though 6 times as many people watched a cooking show, a singing show and a home reno show than the debate. And if only they used auto cues last night, it would have been more animated. It was just terrible. People were doing things off by rote. I think we deserve better than that. And I think that Malcolm Turnbull and Bill Shorten are capable of something better. But it seems everyone is so neatly packaged and homogenised that lets down the country. So you're right. And I think the solution is that we need democracy that is much more dynamic, and we need more of these meetings and politicians being less cloistered and cocooned from the real world.
Nick, just a quick follow-up. Now, what was it about that debate last night? The format was stultifying. I mean, we can certainly say that. But is that the sort of thing that risk-averse campaign strategists actually want? Fewer people watching?
I think they do, and it's been completely disengaged.
Well,
and I found
we've been doing town halls all up and down Australia.
Yeah.
I don't think that we're risk averse. I don't think our campaign strategists are risk
but
averse.
that debate was just completely, it just disengaged and disconnected people. It was a disgrace, and I think Australians deserve better.
Jackie Lambie.
Well, I think we know that Jackie Lambie can't be scripted. That's been quite clear. It's always a bonus. Yeah, and you're right. You know, just they need to tell it how it is, and they need to lead by example. And if you can't do that off the cuff, then you probably shouldn't be there. And you know what? I've made mistakes. They make mistakes. They don't admit it. I do. That's human. We're all human, and we do make mistakes. And I didn't watch last night's debate. I went to a PCYC. I got raffled off for $2,500, so that raised money for them. So I was very grateful to be doing that. But I think, like a mate of mine said today, well, I was yawning within about 10 minutes and I was snoring within about 15. So I think that gave me the rundown of last night.
Steve Ciobo.
Look, I'm not that pessimistic. The reality is I think you've got to be careful that the grass doesn't always seem greener. I mean, I'd look at, for example, the US. Someone like Donald Trump, you would hardly call him someone who's micromanaged to within an inch of his life. Is that sort of more of the kind of debate we'd like to see? I guess one of the privileges you have of being a member of Parliament is I've sat through a lot of debates in the Parliament itself, and a lot of those debates are terrific. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's some poor quality ones, but there's a lot of really good quality debates where even beyond the substance, just the level of engagement is really positive. And frankly, look, this is a parliament that served up Jackie Lambie. It's a parliament that served up Clive Palmer. That served up Nick. I mean, we've got a pretty good mix of people in the parliament, and you can sort of question the style that was adopted with respect to the debate. But I've got to say, I still believe fundamentally that the parliament is a good cross-section of the Australian population.
Just on the debate, why did the commercials refuse to run it? They obviously thought they could see something coming.
I guess they don't think that a couple of politicians debating is as sexy as My Kitchen Rules.
Terry.
Well, I mean, I'm not image managed. I bought this shirt at an op shop in my electorate. And I think that sometimes people think that there's more management going on of images than there actually is. I know that Bill Shorten is perfectly authentic. I've known him for a while, and what you see is what you get with him. Last night's debate wasn't entertaining, but do you really want entertainment from your leadership, or do you want people to articulate?
Well, let's actually go back to our questioner.
Oh, hang on.
You asked the question, Terry.
And it was rhetorical, Tony, and everyone else got to go.
Yeah, but you can have a go. I'm just going to go,
Terry. Do you really want entertainment? And that's really the question.
I'm going to go back to our questioner. You've listened to plenty of the politicians here. What's your view about what you actually wanted from that debate?
I think you just want people to, if there are things that aren't palatable, you want people to tell you. You don't want it sugar-coated. And I just feel like they're so busy fighting each other that they've lost focus on the people that they're supposed to represent.
Okay, Terry, you can continue now.
Well, there is a fight on. There absolutely is a fight on. You've got a fight between us. We want to fund schools. We want to fund hospitals. We've got a plan to save Australian jobs, like the 70,000 Australian jobs that depend on the Great Barrier Reef, for example. And on the other hand, you've got the Liberals who want to give $50 billion away in tax cuts to foreign investors and corporations. And that's the fight. And it's a serious one because it's going to affect the future of the country. So yes, there's a fight. Absolutely there's a fight. Because what we're actually arguing about is the future of the nation and the future of the planet for our kids and for our grandkids. And I don't make any apology for the fact that I'm going to go out and fight really strongly against what I think is some pretty rotten ideas from Steve's mob.
Richard Di Natale.
Oh, the debate was a snooze fest, wasn't it? It's an hour of our life we won't get back. And
did you actually stay awake for the whole lot?
I drifted off towards the end. If there was a winner, it was MasterChef, I reckon. Look, the problem with the debate was every single thing that was said was scripted to within an inch of its life. You could see the sort of focus groups coming out in each of the answers, and I think you're right. People just want politicians who are going to say what they believe and what they think, and they're not getting that at the moment. I mean, Malcolm Turnbull's a case in point. The reason the Liberals are in such trouble at the moment is this is a man who clearly is hamstrung by his party and can't actually say what he thinks. He can't tell you what he thinks. And I heard someone say the other day that he looked tired, and I reckon hypocrisy is really tiring. I think it can really take it out of you when you have to be very careful about every single syllable that comes out of your mouth because you're worried that you're going to offend the backers who put you into the parliament, not because they agreed with your policies, but because they thought you were more popular. And the reason he was popular was because he had views, he expressed them, and now what we're getting is this sort of stage-managed approach from him. And I have to say, it's something that's pervasive in politics more generally. You've got this professional class of politicians who spend their time in student politics. They go and work for a politician. They end up being elected. And what you don't get is people who bring in some life experience, who've got a strong set of convictions, and who tell you what they think. And we need more of that.
Okay, we've got a Twitter question. That's from Robert O'Keefe. Why are Turnbull and Shorten allowed to hide in debates from Richard Di Natale? That's obviously for you. It's not even a question.
Well, look, we would have really enjoyed the opportunity to put our vision to the Australian people. And the reason they don't want us there is they're the Coles and Woolies of politics. You've got the Labor and Liberal Party. A bit of friendly competition from the outside. Nothing brings the old parties closer together than a bit of friendly competition from the outside. And could you imagine, and we had this debate around who could be tougher on just innocent people seeking asylum in this country, people who are fleeing persecution, who are coming here, and the whole debate was who could treat them more harshly, who could brutalise them more. Why not have another perspective there that says there's a different way of dealing with this
Okay,
issue.
all right, Nick Xenophon.
Well, it is a duopoly, and in my home state, I believe in bringing people together. I just didn't really realise there was a Liberal and Labor parties in the last few weeks in terms of South Australia. So I think, you know, it is.
You mean you're bringing them together to try and stop you, is what you mean?
Exactly,
All right.
and at least I brought them together. So I think the issue is that. It is tough to break through. It's tough to break through into a lower house seat, for instance, but I'm hoping we can in South Australia.
All right, we'll come back to that in a minute. Steve Chobo, I'm sure you want to respond to the Coles and Woolies jibe and the various comments made about Malcolm
Well, just
Turnbull.
because, I mean, I actually think that Richard and Nick's attitude is really arrogant, to be blunt. It's an attitude that says,
Seriously?
you know, yeah, I do. I think it's really arrogant because it's an attitude that says to the vast majority of Australians who find a common set of values and principles with the major parties, you're basically, the two of you are sitting there saying, you know what, you're not that smart, you're getting caught up in the hype and the marketing, and you actually need to realise that there's more to politics than what the two majors represent. I'll tell you why the two majors are the two majors. It's because we share values and we share a policy platform that most Australians identify with. Richard, most Australians don't identify with Greens policies. They're not in favour of legalising drugs. They're not in favour of opening up our borders to bring in as many people as possible from overseas. They actually want strong border sovereignty. They want strong border protection. And that's the reason why they will support the Labor Party or the Liberal Party in stronger numbers than they will your party. And mate, you can sit there and be arrogant about it and say, well, that's because they're just not that smart. But I mean, the reality is, mate, the reason they get behind the majors is because there's common values.
All right, you get a quick response to that, yes, and then we'll move on.
You just need to look at what's happening to the major party vote. It's been shrinking election after election after election. And we're having, I'm sure the issue will come up at some point tonight, the question of multi-party government. That will be a regular feature of Australian politics because the growth of the Greens and independents continues with each election because people are sick and tired of the old parties. And let me tell you, the main issue with breaking through is we don't have people who go into a polling booth and say, I'm voting for the Greens or for Nick Xenophon because my grandfather did it and my mother did it and that's who I am. That identity politics is breaking down. You just need to look at the vote amongst young people. If there was a vote amongst people who are under 30 in Australia, there'd possibly be a Greens Prime Minister. And our time is coming. And the reason it is because nothing brings you closer together than the threat from outside. And rather than suggesting that standing for an election is arrogant, what we're doing is we're giving people a choice. And they so desperately want a choice right now.
Richard,
Okay, all
you
right.
weren't at the debate because you... You are not at the debate because you are not vying to become the Prime Minister. You are not at the debate because you do not have the capacity to become the Prime Minister after this federal election. There's a choice. He's in the Senate for a start, and he's got one member of the House of Representatives out of 150.
Well,
and that's why you weren't at the debate. And people have got a serious choice to make here. A choice between two people, one of whom is going to lead this nation, choice between a government that's going to make big cuts to services and hand over money to foreign investors and big corporations, and someone else who's actually got capacity to do real work to save the reef.
I think, by the way, we have to move on, but I will make one point. That is that John Gorton was in the Senate and came down and became Prime Minister.
Well,
let's move on.
One member of the House of
Let's
Representatives.
move on. No, you can't. We'll come back to you because we've got plenty of questions on that subject. What a question from Rick Joseph.
I guess my question is for the whole panel. I applaud the drive for jobs and growth, but what will be done to help the working poor of this country? Families are struggling from paycheck to paycheck with ever-increasing prices for electricity, food and rent. The decision to feed your family or attend to medical issues is a constant battle, let alone striving to have a house of your own one day. Put yourself in the shoes of these people and actually think, how am I going... actually think what it's like to have a single constant thought in your mind. How am I going to make ends meet? Not just the moment you wake up, but during the night because you can't sleep because you're sick with worry. Please stop and actually think what that might feel like. What are you doing to fix this?
Jackie Lambie, I'll start with you.
Well, I won't use the jobs and growth martyr because I'm overdone with that, but I'll tell you what, it's called learning, earning or serving. So you are either learning. So why aren't we encouraging our young people to go and learn and do 2 years and uncap associate degrees in this country and give them their first 2 years of their degree for free? Okay, if they're why aren't we looking at national service so these guys can go and do 12 months? So if you've been on the dole for 12 months and you are physically and psychologically able, then you are going into serve if you are not learning or earning. Okay, and they will look after your dental, your medical. They will also give you a trade before you come out. And then after 12 months, if you want, you can sign on for another 3 years. Or if in that high top bracket, we'll give you an apprenticeship. Because I can tell you what, right now our apprenticeships, they're going wayside, and that's another issue we have. We don't have jobs, and we don't have jobs being presented to this country. We have over 1,457,000 out there, and that's another reason why we don't have jobs here. So there are some really major issues here. Another one is our electricity costs. Okay, our electricity costs are massive, but no one is looking at nuclear power. No one is looking at a gas reserve policy in this country, and that's what we need to be talking about.
Steve Jobo.
Oh, look, that is actually a core focus that we have in relation to the whole mantra. People say, well, we're sick of hearing about jobs and growth. Well, we're not sick of talking about it because we actually think that jobs and growth is actually what's going to drive this Australian economy forward and going to ensure that we have jobs for people in the future. One of the things that we focused on, obviously, coming into the last election was our decision to abolish the carbon tax. The reason being because the people who are most heavily penalised were the ones who had least disposable income to spend on things like, for example, electricity. That's the reason why when we took that decision to remove it, we kept the carbon tax compensation in place to try to make it easier for them. But fundamentally what it comes down to is whether or not you can make sure that you are providing the incentives to those that take risk, that create employment, that invest their money to try to create wealth so that they in turn can provide employment opportunities for others. If it was as simple as just saying, well, you know, instead of getting a bulldozer to dig a hole, we're going to get 1,000 people out there with teaspoons, then that would be the solution. But it's not that simple. You actually need the economy to work, you need the growth, and that's why it's absolutely crucial that there's an economic plan for this country. Because at the moment, the rest of the world is struggling with a lot of economic headwinds, but Australia, with 3% growth, has the highest rate of growth out of any G7 country, and 3 times the rate of job creation, which provides a better future for those who are looking for work.
Nick Xenophon.
I'm sitting next to the Trade Minister, and he's a decent bloke, but I think that what we're doing to sign up on the TPP will be a big mistake. If we're interested in about our national sovereignty in terms of jobs, then we should have a Buy Australian First policy when it comes to the $59 billion a year that the Commonwealth spends on procurement. Why should we be exporting jobs overseas to the extent that we are? The government's own analysis says that in terms of the China, the Japan and Korea free trade agreements, that exports to those countries will go up 0.5%.
Nick, I'm going to get you to address the question specifically, because that was really a question about the growing divide in Australia, as that person sees it between haves and have-nots.
Absolutely, okay. And there's a growing divide because we have policies in place that I think will weaken our economy, that we should be spending government monies on local procurement, on local jobs. And in terms of the growing divide, the fact that there are pensioners in this country that can't afford heating, that there are families who just simply cannot get by on week to week indicates a gross failure of our policy. And one of the things we need to do is to get away from this free trade mantra that I think is actually making our economy weaker, not stronger.
You think less trade is better?
Well, if you look at your own figures, if you look at your own figures, our foreign debt, no, not protectionist walls, our foreign debt is approaching $1 trillion. Which is extraordinary.
Well,
last year was $74 billion. Yeah. I saw the Labor Party's fight. Well, last year was $74 billion.
Okay, so I'm not going to let this sidebar argument interrupt the flow. Can I hear from Terry?
Certainly. I worked at a startup firm some time ago, and pretty much everyone there was living week to week. Me too at the time, putting myself through uni. And it went under. And last week they didn't pay anyone's wages. And what actually forced them to pay us was the fact that we worked together and held them to account. And ultimately, I think what's happening in this country is people are getting weaker and weaker and jobs are getting less and less secure. And that's something that I think is a real problem. You know, Jackie talks about 457 visa workers. I'm worried about the number of 457 visa workers in this country, and I'm worried about the lack of security that they have because the fact that they are easily exploited, means that they are quite weak and that drives down conditions for everyone else. I'm worried about the fact that the Productivity Commission in the Liberals' review of the IR laws didn't seem to think that the fact that we've had so many independent contractors setting up in the last 15 years and having no security was a problem. I'm worried about the fact that they don't think that casualisation of labour, people just not knowing whether they're still going to have a job, is a problem. I think most of us would have had people in our family who've been made redundant from a job, or I was made redundant from that job, been made redundant themselves. I think we've all seen what's happening in workplaces across this country, even in government workplaces where there's government, there's 100,000 or more government employees who don't have an agreement because Malcolm Turnbull's been unable to sign off on agreements. The fact is, job insecurity is a major problem in this country. The way we deal with it is not through xenophobia, it's not through trying to lock out the world, but it's also not through saying we've just got to have completely laissez-faire, a free open slather for everyone. We actually need strong workplace relations laws, and we need to have a strong economy. And that also doesn't mean just leave it to the market. I don't support that at all. That's why, for example, I mentioned before, there's 70,000 jobs that depend on the Great Barrier Reef. That's why we can have strong pro-environment policies, stronger pro-environment laws, and better jobs and more secure jobs into the future.
Richard Di Natale.
Well, it's a great question, and it's something we just don't talk enough about, this growing inequality in Australian society. One of the reasons I got into this job, I spent a couple of years working in the Northern Territory in Aboriginal health in a medical clinic, and it was an experience that made me realise if you're going to do something about people's health, you've got to start with the circumstances in which people live. And we live in a country where there are 2.5 million people living below the poverty line, 600,000 of them kids, and yet we don't, when someone can't find a job, we commit them to poverty because New Start's way too low. We need to increase New Start. We put big barriers in front of people to be able to access healthcare. We've got increasing out-of-pocket costs for people going to see a doctor, a GP. We've got the government that wants to freeze Medicare rebates, taking money out of hospitals. Education, you've got, again, kids who are born in an area of disadvantage. You know automatically that's going to impact on the educational opportunities, which is why we need to fund Gonski. We have so much work to do in Australia to address that growing gap between the rich and ordinary people. And we've got a government that wants to give $50 billion in tax cuts and just hope that magically that money will flow through to people who are vulnerable. It doesn't work like that. It's a failed ideology. We can be much better. We've got to end those unfair tax breaks. There are so many of them, negative gearing, superannuation, multinational tax avoidance. And let's start funding Medicare, funding New Start, investing in schools, investing in TAFE. They're the sort of things that are the foundations of a decent society.
Can I quickly go back to our questioner there, Rick Joseph? Rick, listening around the panel, a variety of different suggestions and ideas. What are you thinking?
Look, for me, I come from, I guess, a housing commission background, and I'm trying to break that cycle with my family. Trying to give my son the education that he deserves. You guys force me to look at alternative education sources because, the public system, it just doesn't give him what he needs. You force me to spend, 3 hours in traffic getting to work every day because the infrastructure that should be there just isn't there. You force me to pay more for rent every week than I need to because housing affordability is just terrible. You force my wife not to work as much as she should because, childcare is too expensive. I'm trying to, break that cycle, but there's just blocks everywhere.
That's right.
Why can't you guys just do something about that?
And that's why we want to do it. That's why we're running. That's why I'm running, because I want to be part of a government that's got a positive plan for all of those things. Everything you mentioned, sir, schools, health, and housing affordability is core platform for us, and that's why
I'm going to take that as a comment because I've got so many questions. It's a very passionate comment. I think it's quite a good place to leave that subject. We'll move on to the next question from David Carter.
I've worked as a chef for over 17 years. The Productivity Commission recommended a cut in Sunday penalty rates to people like me in the hospitality industry. But hospitality workers are already some of the lowest paid workers in Australia. Steve Chobo, why are Sundays more important to people who work in other industries, but not so important for people like me in hospitality? I give up my weekends to serve others too.
Steve Trevor.
Sure. Well, I'm not sure about which other industries you're referring to, but on the issue of penalty rates, more
Well,
generally,
nurses, police, firemen, they're going to be exempted from Sunday penalty rate changes.
So, well, look, ultimately, if the Productivity Commission has put that forward, that's the best directed towards the Productivity Commission. But I want to talk about penalty rates more generally. The decision that we've got to make around penalty rates, and I'll give you an example. My office is on Chevron Isle on the Gold Coast. Just down the road from me was a sandwich bar. It was open 6 days a week. When they brought in the penalty, it was closed on Mondays. When they brought in higher penalty rates under Labor, I spoke to the proprietor of that shop who employed three women in his store. And he said, it's no longer viable for me to open on a Sunday. So he then closed and he had a 2-day weekend, Sunday and Monday, and didn't open on Sunday at all. Now, the consequence of that so-called higher rates of pay was that those 3 women actually lost out on employment full stop on Sundays, because it was no longer viable for him to open. And we see that now on public holidays. You've only got to walk around any tourist area, for example, on the Gold Coast or in Brisbane, and see how many cafes and restaurants are now closed because the owner is not making any money. So it's not about trying to begrudge people from getting extra pay from penalty rates. It's just a reflection of the economic facts, which is that if a business isn't making money, it's not going to open. And so if you say, well, what's in it for you as a hospitality worker? Well, in many instances, and what we know in aggregate terms across the economy, is that the higher the penalty rates are, the fewer employment opportunities that are created.
Okay, we've actually got a question on that subject. It's from Ryan Webb.
A recent study by Restaurant and Catering Australia has found that unifying penalty rates across Saturday and Sundays could create 40,000 new jobs in Australia, with almost 9,000 right here in Queensland. With youth unemployment at 13.5% nationally and peaking at well over 20% in regional areas, it's clear that double time rates on Sundays are locking tens of thousands of young Australians out of the workforce. If we're serious about creating jobs and opportunity, wouldn't ending Sunday penalty rates be a great place to start?
I'll start with Terry Butler on this.
So you're saying an interest group commissioned a report and it said exactly what the interest group wanted? That's amazing. What are the odds? What are the odds, Nick? Look, my dad was a shift worker, unsociable hours. He deserved penalty rates. The former questioner was a chef. He works unsociable hours. You give up your Sundays. You're not there for Mother's Day, Father's Day. You're not there for church. You're not there for all sorts of things. You deserve recognition for that. I'm an employer myself. I've got a nanny at home. I pay her penalty rates when she works overtime. I don't know if anyone else on this panel does that. I think when people work unsociable hours, there should be recognition of that. When I was a lawyer, I did some work on the night shift penalty case for firemen. You know, this politician had said, oh, these guys, they just stand around having photos taken, they're not doing anything. They are doing something. They're having their life disrupted, they're having their family disrupted, and they are paying a significant price. We're already talking about some of the lowest paid people. Do not believe the gobbledygook that says if you just cut wages, suddenly there'll be magically more employment. That's just more of the trickle-down nonsense that Steve Chobo was talking about.
So, Terry, hasn't Bill Shorten already said that Labor will accept the Commission's decision on Sunday penalty rates? He won't fight it.
Bill Shorten has said that we will fight for penalty rates because that's what we will do.
I think he said, in fact, he said it's up to the Commission and I'll accept the independent tribunal.
We can legislate.
Because that works so well in the US, legislating the minimum wage.
We can legislate penalty rates.
How do you think Ted Kennedy would have felt about that?
We could legislate penalty rates.
And then they'd be stuck in stone forever. You never get an improvement.
Terry, the problem is that
why is that a problem? If you want
to
to protect penalty rates, just protect them in law. I mean, I agree with you.
Mate, go to the US and ask them about how that worked for their minimum wages.
I agree with you that penalty rates are important, and when the Parliament starts to sit on a Sunday, maybe we can have a discussion about whether we abolish penalty rates.
Can I just quickly get to this point though? If Bill Shorten's going to accept the tribunal's decision and they say Sunday penalty rates go for people like the hospitality workers, Labor won't be fighting.
We're fighting for penalty rates. We put in a submission, Tony, to the Fair Work Commission. Unlike
submission.
Some
but
other
are you
people
going to
on this
accept?
panel.
Are you going to
win.
accept the tribunal's decision or not?
Tony, we put in a submission arguing why penalty rates should be there. Penalty rates have been a feature.
That'll fix
penalty
it.
rates have been. Look, I've got a bit more confidence in Fair Work Commission than you do. Maybe because you've never been there, but I have. And I know that penalty rates have been a feature in this country for a very long time because the Commission recognises the unsociable hours and the sacrifices that your kids, that your family members, that your friends, that you make because you give up your time on a Sunday. You're quite right, maybe Parliament should sit, Richard. Maybe churches should start having services on a Tuesday lunchtime. But the fact is our society is divided up. We do have weekends.
Okay,
weekends still matter.
Let's hear from our other panellists. Nick Xenophon.
Look, I took a lot of order on this politically because I was worried about young people losing their jobs on Sundays. I handled it badly. I listened and I learnt from both small businesses and employees. Restaurant and catering, 40,000. The figure that I relied on when I advocated for this, I think in a misguided way, was 4,000. So there's been a zero added onto it in the last few years. Look, I think small businesses are doing it tough. If students are working on a Sunday and that's the only job they can get, that's something to take into account. But ultimately, I hate to say it, but I'm with Bill Shorten on this. I think you need to have the independent umpire to assess it. If there is some small variation for small businesses with a dozen or 20 employees or less, maybe there's something in that, but we mustn't lose that safety net.
Jackie Lambie.
Yes, last time we let a tribunal or commission decide something was the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal, and 35,000 truck driver owners would have lost their bloody jobs. That's what happens up there.
That is not true.
So that's exactly what's true. Exactly what's true.
You're wrong.
So you know what? Don't trust those public servants. I can tell you that right now.
Oh, good. Public servant bashing. Excellent. Any public servants in the audience? Would you like to tell
first of all, this is like Medicare. If you start chipping away at your penalty rates, it's like Medicare. It'll be the frontline services that'll be next. There's no doubt about that. That money that these people earn on Sundays, that feeds back into their small businesses within their community. So no way am I supporting penalty cuts for Sundays. I just won't do that.
Okay, we're going to move on. We've got plenty of questions to go through. You're watching Q&A live from Brisbane. The Prime Minister called this double dissolution to clear away a hostile Senate. But the experts tell us after July 2, the balance of power will still be held by the Greens and independents like Nick Xenophon and Jackie Lambie. Our next question is from Harry Spicer.
Thanks, Tony. My question's to all the crossbenchers here tonight. Given that you held the Gillard government hostage, which objectively resulted in horrendous policy outcomes for Australia, and given that you've now spent the last 3 years being openly hostile to any reform in the Senate, as well as regularly being patently unreasonable in negotiations, arguably holding our democracy to your self-interest, why should Australians consider voting for you this election? Are independents really what the punters want?
Richard Dinner. You can start us off. Okay. So I think you're the only one who actually held Julia Gillard.
I suspect he's not a Greens voter.
How'd you guess that?
Look, a few things. Let me firstly challenge this assertion that the previous period, the Gillard government, with the support of the Greens and Independents, was not a productive period of government. We had the world's most significant climate legislation passed. The best climate laws anywhere in the country. We had a number of other things, Medicare-funded dental care and so on.
I'll just say politically, the carbon tax turned out to be a fatal misjudgment on Gillard's part, did it not?
Well, the problem I think
against the CPRS.
The problem with, I think history is sort of been rewritten a little bit here. The problem with that period of government was the division within the Labor Party. You had the Rudd division, and people were very angry about that. I think the climate legislation, there's very significant support for strong climate laws in the country. We had Medicare-funded dental care. You've got kids now who can go to the dentist and have $1,000 worth of Medicare-funded dental care provided. And that was a condition of the Greens inside playing a constructive role with independents, with the Labor Party. Now, talking about the role that we've played in the Senate at the moment.
Do it briefly because we want to hear from everybody.
Yeah, look, if it wasn't for the Senate, we'd have Medicare co-payments. We'd have young kids who have been taken off income support for 6 months. We'd have $100,000 degrees. And the Senate played a very constructive role. We're there as a House of Review. When there's bad policy, we won't support it. We've also been very constructive. We helped to pass laws around multinational tax avoidance. The Greens ensured that that legislation got through. Medical Research Future Fund, foreign ownership legislation, a whole raft of significant legislation with the Greens playing a constructive role in the Senate. And Australians like it. They put us there. They vote for us because they want a check on executive government. That's the reason the Senate exists, and that's why people vote for us in that position.
Okay, Nick Xenophon.
Sometimes the Senate needs to save a government from itself. That was a ripper of a question, and let me rip into it now. The fact is, I come from the political centre. At the last election, I know Steve says we're on the fringes. At the last election, I managed to outpoll the Labor Party and just under the Liberal Party vote. I was up against Corey Bernardi, and he's much more popular than me in South Australia. But the issue is that the Senate is there to put a check on the executive arm of government, as Richard said.
I understand that, but if you take a look at like the United Kingdom system or the Queensland system, you can clearly see in those systems, like where the government's run riot, they get pulled into line and they get voted out. The Newman government was voted out, and in the UK where they don't have that.
Remember Joe Bjelke-Peterson? Does that name ring a bell?
Okay, finish your point there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just saying, you know, I think governments should be given a mandate to go and do the reform they want to do, and if the electorate hate that, well, then kick them out.
Okay, that's a good point to bring Nick Xenophon back in. Go ahead.
Well, guess what? The founding, those that founded our Constitution 120 odd years ago, during those constitutional conventions, agreed that we needed to have a check and balance. We need to have a states house. We needed to have a proportional representation system, which in some ways is more democratic than the winner-take-all approach in the lower house, in a sense, in seats. So that's really important, that we need to have that check and balance. From my point of view, it's about working constructively with the government of the day, but it's also about holding them to account. And my concern is that the major parties are not in tune with a whole range of issues, such as free trade agreements, which I think aren't in the national interest. So you're shaking your head. Happy to exchange some information with you on that. Okay. But the issue is
Nick,
this.
Nick, can I just jump in there? Because
sure.
If the polls are right, you could end up with 3 or even 4 senators. You could be in a very significant position. And going back to the second part of his question there, would you accept the government has a mandate to do certain things? For example, the $50 billion company tax cut.
People vote differently between the two houses of parliament. I mean, I have real concerns that the $50 billion tax cut, corporate tax cut, is the best way to stimulate the economy. We are facing the loss of 200,000 jobs in manufacturing in this country by the end of next year. That, to me, is a jobs crisis that we need to address now, rather than when people turn up on dole queues.
So, sorry, that's a no to the corporate tax cut?
Look, the government has a mandate to introduce legislation. The Senate has a mandate to scrutinise it very carefully.
Jackie Lambie?
Just so the mandating's not the issue. It's the stuff that they bring in after that they don't tell you before the election. That's the problem. Okay, now just so we're clear, the crossbench has put through 75% of the legislation. We put through $30 billion worth of savings and $32 billion we did not. Okay, but if you want, I mean, this gentleman over here, I'm sorry, what was your name up there? You were very good. Everything you said was very, very true. And do you know what's come to that? Because you've had the Labor and the Libs in power. Do you still want them to continue in the next 10 or 20 years? That's the choice that you have, because it's not us that have made this mess, it is the majors.
Jackie, he might not want his kids to be conscripted, though. I mean, maybe your solutions aren't...
No, it's involuntary.
I'm just suggesting, I'm just not sure.
It's involuntary.
Yeah.
I just want to put a bit of a reality check on some of this conversation from the crossbench. I mean, we're talking about Australia. We've had 25 years of continuous economic growth, the only country in the world with a period of growth that long. We've got 5.7% unemployment. We're a country that is, frankly, in global terms, one of the highest standard of livings in the world, a per capita GDP ratio that's the envy around the world, one of the best health systems in the world, one of the best, but hang on, but I'm not saying that everybody has it great. I'm not saying that for a second. But when I hear Jackie and yourself, Nick, saying about this great mess and how bad it is, I mean, for goodness sake,
You've been saying that about Labor for the past 20 years.
No, hang on.
You know what it would be?
That's not the case at all. A reality check about how we're performing as a country. Because you know what? This country is standing up. This country is standing on its own 2 feet and doing pretty well. That's not to say things can't be better, but as a country, we are doing pretty well, and it's because of the sensible mainstream policies that's.
Can I just say? So, are you basically arguing that even with the situation in the Senate, we're doing well? So it isn't really a serious problem?
There's no more budget emergency, Tony. That's been made quite clear.
Nothing brings them closer together, Tony, than a little bit of competition from the outside. I mean, you've got Stephen going into bat for the Labor Party now after spending the last 10 years.
I don't think that's what he was doing.
The reality is, Richard, that apart from those comments, the fact is that as a nation, on any objective measure, what I'm saying is Australia isn't doing too badly, and things aren't all rotten.
All right, okay, I'm going to go to our next question. Sorry, we've got a few
that.
things to get through. Let's go to our next question. It's from Patricia Bulchin.
Moving on.
Hang on, we'll just wait. Patricia, can you stand up so we can see you? Thank you.
My question is to Richard, to Nick and to Jackie. The polls are tightening, so in the event of a hung parliament, which side of politics would you choose? And in your opinion, who would make the better Prime Minister?
Nick Xenophon.
I think it's 1,000,000 to 1 shot in terms of that, but if it does happen, it depends, and I'm hoping that we will pick up some seats in the lower house, particularly in South Australia.
Well, you're looking at both Liberal and Labor seats, because the polls are saying you're actually polling very well in well, at least one poll is saying you're polling much higher in the lower house in South Australia than anyone thought.
Well, we'll wait and see, but I think, Rebecca Sharkey, our candidate for Mayo, is doing very well based on some recent polls in the seat against Jamie Briggs. Look, in the highly unlikely event that occurs, then it's a question of negotiating with both sides, being open about it, consulting with your community, and basically trying to see who will do the best job, and to try and bring the parties to the centre on issues such as gambling.
But do you have a set of principles around who you would choose? What are they? Who gets the highest popular vote? Who gets the most number of seats? What is the set of principles?
The set of principles will be what will they do about issues such as predatory gambling, about Australian-made and Australian jobs, and about government transparency and accountability. These, I think,
so it's a horse trading arrangement you're talking about?
No, it's about principles, and the principles are that the major parties, I think it's outrageous that you have the federal police using their resources raiding people under antiquated Official Secrets Acts when Senator Conroy's office was raided just a few days ago.
Jackie Lambie. You've got a set of principles around who you would go for, who'd make the best Prime Minister, or you already have your mind?
No.
Do you have your mind set on that?
No, I don't, because like I've already said, we don't have a great talent pool when it comes to Prime Ministers in this country to choose from, I'll be honest. And that, I actually feel that way, and I'm sure many Australians do as well. But I'm not running lower house candidates, so my concentration's in the Senate, and I'll do what I've done in the past, and every legislation that comes up, I will be voting on that with its own merits. So I'll be doing what I'm doing already, out there consulting, talking to the people in the know, and that's how I'll make my decisions and what's best by the Australian people and Tasmanians, and that's what I'll be doing.
Richard Di Natale.
Well, just look at the issues that we're campaigning on during this election, taking strong action on global warming, the transition to the renewable energy economy and all the jobs that comes with that, a bit more just decency towards people seeking asylum in this country rather than brutalising them.
Yeah, very precisely, in a hung parliament, which party would you choose?
I'm answering
and who would make the better Prime Minister?
I'm answering the question.
All right, okay, you need to do it quickly.
Look at those issues: inequality, Medicare, schools, political donations and reform around those areas. Now, on all of those measures, this government has been a disaster. They have been a disaster. So while this is a decision for the party to make, my view is that it's inconceivable that we could support this government, and that ultimately, if the choice came down to who we'd support, we'd like to enter productive, responsible negotiations with the Labor Party.
And Terry Butler, are you open to an alliance with the Greens? You've done it before.
We intend to win a majority in the lower house. I think probably the more likely question is, what are the alliances going to be in the Senate once Malcolm Turnbull's policy to get Pauline Hanson elected to the Senate comes good and she's in the Senate next term? I think, frankly, Malcolm Turnbull getting Pauline Hanson into the Senate is going to be the biggest sleeper issue, and I actually think he should apologise for getting her in there in the first place.
Okay, we're going to move on to our... very briefly.
I reckon a Labor-Liberal coalition probably makes the most sense. I reckon that's the one that we should have.
Come on, Richard. You just... Honestly, that's such a silly thing to have said. Our values are so different.
Okay, let's just quickly move to our next question. It's from Hannah Taylor.
There's been ongoing discussion of preference deals between the Liberals and the Greens in a mutual attempt to undercut Labor seats. Wouldn't any such preference deal, whether formal or informal, be a complete betrayal of the values of both of your parties?
Particularly when you want an alliance with them.
So let's just be clear, we won't be preferencing the Liberal Party in any seat in the country. We've made that very clear. We'll do what we've done in most elections. Our branches will preference Labor. In some seats they won't like the Labor candidate and they won't recommend preferences to anybody. That's the decision that I suspect we'll make. You've got Anthony.
Isn't that essentially a strategic decision?
No, we've
in
done
seats where you've got a chance of
No,
winning?
it's not. We've done that, I think, in every election I've been involved in,
made a
Tony.
deal with Michael
And in fact,
Kroger.
you know what's interesting?
I mean, he's not denying he made the deal, is he?
The only person out there canvassing...
Sorry, you need to respond to that.
What was the question?
But you're doing it because you made the deal with the Liberals. I mean, you're not denying you made the deal.
What deal
Well,
are you
Michael
talking about?
Kroger's saying that you
Oh,
made a
Michael Kroger said it. It must be true.
So you're denying it?
Yes, I am, absolutely.
There's no deal with the Liberals?
There is no deal with the Liberal Party. There is absolutely no deal. The only deal
haven't
that
made a
I'm
deal with
aware
them
of
that
is a
you're
deal
not gonna
between the
preference.
Labor Party and the Liberal Party in Melbourne Ports, where Michael Danby has said he would rather have a Liberal member of Parliament than a Greens member, effectively in a hung Parliament potentially handing government to the Liberals. And we've got Anthony Albanese out there saying, please, to the Liberal Party, please give me your preferences. He's been out there for the past 2 weeks with a begging bowl saying, we desperately need your preferences to help me get over the line, pleading for Liberal
preferences. Give me your
preferences.
primary vote to voters, because that's actually what's going to matter in that seat.
Let me quickly go to Steve Chobo here. I mean, Michael Kroger, Victorian power broker of the Liberal Party, did want to do agreements with the Greens. Have any of them happened? Would you support such an agreement, your preference swapping deal?
Richard's already made his point very clear in terms of there being no deal. But, you know, for me, Tony, it's quite fascinating to watch Terry and Richard bicker, because, you see, what's fascinating about this election is that the Labor Party knows that they're in serious strife, because they obviously appeal to the centre-left. Richard knows this is the best opportunity that the Greens have ever had to really strike forward. They're trying to do that. The way in which you see this playing out is, take, for example, on border protection. The Labor Party is split, massively split on border protection. More than 30 candidates and members have now openly repudiated Bill Shorten's position on border protection. Richard knows it. He's tapping into those who say, well, you know, the way forward isn't what the government's currently doing. And the Labor Party's completely split down the guts, because you've got people like Terry and others who say, no, there's no difference between us and the Liberal Party. And then you've got those on the far left of the party. Those on the far left of the party who are saying, we're with the Greens, we're with the Greens. I mean, this is the fundamental problem that Labor's got, the challenge they've got to get over. Richard knows it. That's why he's excited, because he says, Tony, this is the best chance we've ever had to get more Greens members in.
I know this is really hard to believe, but I don't care what the Labor Party think about this issue. I care about those kids who are rotting in hellholes in those offshore camps, because we've got a Liberal government and a Labor Party who haven't got the courage to stand up and say these are people who are going to make a contribution to this country, and a decent society doesn't take innocent people and harm them, and we know they're being harmed, to send a message to someone else.
So, Richard, how come you didn't care, mate?
Innocent people.
How come? Okay, I'm going to cut that one off there. You both had your say. I want to hear our next question, a totally different subject. It's from Nathan Schultz.
My question is to Stephen
Hang on a
Chobo.
sec. Can you please stand up, Nathan?
Yeah, sure. My question is to Stephen Chobo. My wife and I own a small business, a cafe, which I'm very pleased that previous Liberal members of this panel have recognised as being important to the political debate. We unfortunately don't have a $6,000 toaster. The corporate tax cuts which your government have proposed will give my wife and I about an extra $8 a week, which is excellent. But meanwhile, I understand that people in this room are more likely for themselves and their families to spend more money going to the GP. So my question is, wouldn't it make more sense to cut out the middleman? You could keep the $8, everyone in this room could have bulk billing protected, and then all of my customers would have more money for our shop.
Steve Chobo. Are you surprised to find a small business owner who doesn't want the tax cuts?
Well, look, I mean, what we're trying to do, and the focus and the reason we've put this enterprise tax cut on the table, is because we know that small businesses are the backbone of the Australian economy. If that's a cliche, there's a reason why that's a cliche, because small businesses drive Australia forward. So by providing a tax cut, we're going to be going from being one of the most heavily taxed nations in the world with respect to company tax rates, and actually become one that's more competitive. And we know that by doing that, more businesses will employ people, there'll be an improvement in overall profitability, and that's ultimately going to be good for the Australian economy.
Just a quick one, though, on his figures. Well, actually, go ahead. Your figure. Where do you get this $8 a week figure? Is that how you've calculated your tax?
Absolutely. So a 1% tax cut, corporate tax cut next year would be in the order of, say, $400. I think the Australian Bureau of Statistics figures were something like average profitability $70,000, which means you're looking at a $7,000 saving. Now, look, a $700 saving. Where I have a difficulty with this argument is certainly to have more jobs, you need profitability. But I don't understand why, and certainly with your corporate background, you think that more profitability certainly leads to more jobs. I own a coffee shop, as I said. I need 1, 2 or 3 people making coffees in the morning. Why, if I'm making more profit, am I suddenly going to put on a 4th or 5th or a 6th person? Doesn't make sense.
Well, it does make sense, and the reason it makes sense is because we see it happen time and time and time every single day. Businesses that aren't making money don't employ staff. Businesses that are losing money fire staff. Businesses that are making money and growing employ more staff. I mean, that's an incontrovertible fact.
What if there's diseconomies
the
of
simple
scale?
fact is, well, but hang on, but it's not about one thing in isolation. It's about multiple things. I mean, you don't have to take my word for it. Bill Shorten, when he, as leader of the opposition, in his budget and reply speech last year, spoke at length about the need to cut the company tax rate down to 25%. I mean, that's from the head of the Labor Party. Bill Shorten, at a speech in ACOS, used the exact words, and he said, a reduction in company tax rates builds jobs and grows jobs across the full ladder of opportunity.
Okay,
across
Steve,
all
let's get a response from Terry Butler on that first of all, and we'll hear from the other panellists as well. But keep your answers brief so get through some more questions.
Definitely will. So the corporate tax cuts that we're talking about are $48.2 billion worth of tax cuts over 10 years. They're costing $8 billion a year to all of us in this room, taxpayers. And what they're expected to achieve is 0.6 of 1% in terms of increase in gross national income. That's what we're talking about spending around $50 billion for. Now, yes, Bill did talk about an aspiration for small business for a lower tax rate, absolutely. But what the Liberals are bringing in is a corporate tax cut for everyone. And you know who's going to benefit? Because of dividend imputation, it's going to benefit foreign shareholders. That's who's going to get the benefit of that tax cut. Ross Gitton said today it's more like foreign aid for wealthy shareholders in other countries than it is a tax cut for corporations in Australia. So you know what? How about we take that money and we spend it on health and education, which will actually contribute to economic growth. Okay. Don't take my word for it. Ask the OECD.
Let's just hear from our Jackie Lambie. You want to get in?
Okay, so this is the problem that I have. What classifies a small business? How much money can they make? Because I can tell you what, if they put a cap, because a lot of small businesses don't make a lot of money, if you actually put a cap on that instead of feeding your big business mates up the top, you'd be able to give them about another 10% cut on top. You would be able to do that, and then they would be able to employ more people. But you've got to, you know, that's a small business. Multinationals are not small businesses, mate.
Nick Xenophon.
Am I missing something here? Because most small businesses, and the ABC fact-checking unit might say that I'm wrong, and by the way, they're being shut down, I think, after the election, which I think some people, some pollies might be quite happy about. I'm not, even though I've been caught out by them a couple of times. But I learned from that. Look, the thing is, most small businesses, I think about 90% of small businesses with less than a turnover of $2 million are not incorporated. They're not companies. They're actually sole traders or partnerships, and there's nothing in it for them. So
no, that's not true at all. No, that's false.
You're fact checking.
We are providing. I'm not. I'm teaching you.
To use
your words, I'm teaching you. We're also providing tax relief for partners.
Soon you'll be negotiating with him, not teaching him. Okay, Richard Dinatale.
Oh, well, it's just the choices. I mean, these are choices. And as a society, we have to decide what things we value. And whether we value Medicare, whether we think we should bring dental into Medicare, whether we value schools and we want to invest in things like the Gonski reforms and kids. I mean, we've got almost 500,000 kids with disabilities in this country who can't get access to support in schools, who can't meet their potential. Whether we value the arts. I mean, today the Greens launched an arts policy, more funding for artists through the Australia Council, through small and medium-sized artistic enterprises. I mean, they're the sort of choices that we have as a society to make. And our view is business doesn't need this tax cut, but people who need to access a doctor, kids who want a decent school, our artistic community, and so on. That's where we should be making the investment. And that's why the Greens are taking into this election a fully costed platform, which doesn't include tax cuts, includes actually ending a whole lot of unfair tax breaks and investing in the foundations of what is a decent society.
Okay, I'm going to go quickly to our another question, will be our last question. We're in Queensland, it's an important question. It's from Christy Harling.
Good evening to the panel. I've lived in central Queensland, which encompasses towns such as Emerald, Blackwater and Moranbah for a number of years, working in the mining industry. Today, we see the aftermath of the mining boom after 21,000 jobs have been lost in the region. It breaks my heart to see local families struggling to put food on the table and to see hundreds of houses empty because of foreclosure with no one to fill them. The people of central Queensland need help now and are suffering due to a lack of transition planning for the region. With all of this talk of jobs and growth, what are your plans for the next industry in central Queensland to ensure it is not left littered with ghost towns?
Steve Chobo.
Look, great question. I mean, as someone who... as someone who grew up in far north Queensland, I've got, I think, a pretty good appreciation of a lot of the challenges that people from central and north Queensland have. And what we're focused on is this exact issue about a transitioning economy. You would have heard the Prime Minister talk about making sure we have a national economic plan to deal with our transitioning economy. So the kinds of industries that we're talking about here, one, we want to make sure that projects like, for example, Carmichael go ahead. But secondly, we also want to make sure that there's opportunities in, for example, the tourism industry. We want to make sure that for those that are going to be involved in welcoming more international tourists to Australia, a key growth sector for our country in the future, that they've got a chance to do that. We want to invest in skills training, invest in opportunities for those people to get education if they want to pursue that, so that they can then also start to pursue other industries. We want to make sure that we're doing more around agribusiness and agricultural exports. And to go to Nick's point about trade being bad, I hold the exact opposite.
I didn't say trade was bad, don't verbal.
Okay, well, I'm shorthanding.
Yeah, well,
but the point is, though, that we can, by opening up more trade export opportunities, grow more opportunities for Australian businesses. And we know that that will flow across the economy.
Now, Steve, can I just jump in there? You mentioned tourism, and of course we know the Great Barrier Reef is under a sort of existential threat at the moment. Flinders University researchers say it's going to take $10 billion over 10 years to save the reef. Is that part of your plan? I mean, part of your planning?
Yeah, well, there's two things that are happening with the reef. One, the Coalition has put down $460 million to work around issues in terms of water quality. So we stopped, for example, dredging. I often hear, Labor and the Greens talk about...
Sorry, how much did you say? Just
$460 million.
Okay.
Labor and the Greens talk about water quality. We actually stopped under a coalition the dredging that was going to be putting sediment into the reef. In addition to that, what we're focused on is dealing with the issue of climate change. Under the coalition, we have put in, well, people can laugh, but under the coalition, we have put in place, well, the policy that apparently is terrible is a policy that will see Australia on a per capita basis put on the table in Paris and agreed to one of the highest per capita reductions in the world
because our per capita
from
is
this
so
country.
high at the moment.
And in Australia, what it actually means is that we're going to play our role together with the rest of the world.
All right, so that's good. Terry Butler.
If you're doing so well on climate change, why did Malcolm Turnbull try to keep Australia out of that UN report? If you're doing so well on climate change, why are we having so much?
Terry, that is a point well made because of the end of his answer. But let's go back to the question. And do you want to respond, Kristen?
Look, I just want to see some actual, some real developments.
Some policy,
where is the future? Especially, Richard, I'd love to hear what you have for your plans for Central Queensland, especially.
Well, I tell you what, we won't be doing is opening up a new coal mine and killing the Great Barrier Reef. Right? If you care about tourism, you don't open up a whopping great big coal mine and fuel catastrophic global warming. But this is the great tragedy here in Australia right now, is we've got the two old parties committed to opening up new coal mines and preventing this country from realising the huge opportunities that come with making the transition to the clean, renewable energy economy. We've got a plan called Renew Australia. Tens of thousands of jobs, solar farms, solar thermal, wind farms, cutting-edge renewable energy technology. In Germany, 400,000 jobs because of the decisions they made with the Greens in government at the time to stimulate this economy. And the towns that benefit from them are regional communities. I've just done a regional tour. Broken Hill, Mildura, the Liverpool Plains and so on. What tremendous natural advantages we have in Australia with our sun, our wind, our space, our knowledge, our capacity, our expertise, to be able to fuel a jobs boom in those regional communities. And the great tragedy, we've got the two old parties slashing the Australian Renewable Energy Agency's budget slashing the renewable energy target, more coal mines, fossil fuel subsidies, and then taking those huge donations from the fossil fuel industry. And if you want to know why those communities you spoke about are in such trouble, look no further than the massive donations that have been given to both the old parties from the fossil fuel lobby.
Okay, Terry Butler.
Well, I don't support the Adani mine either, I've got to say. I mean, fair play
Your
to our
party
state...
does.
No,
Your
fair play
party
to our...
does.
No, fair play to our state government. They didn't have much discretion. They were using laws that have been amended by the Newman government, but I don't support it. And might I say this? It's great that you've got a good policy, Richard. It's absolutely fantastic. But we have a fantastic policy and we can form government and deliver it. That's the difference between Labor and the Greens. Our policy...
Not for long.
50% renewables. No, this is serious. This is actually serious. You can make jokes. But our policy of 50% renewables by 2030 that we will implement, that will actually see the investment go back into renewables after Malcolm Turnbull and his crew slashed that investment, we will actually have a policy that will deliver on 50% renewables by 2030, will deliver green jobs for our economy, will protect our reef, $500 million to protect the reef, and we'll have a just transition because, let's be honest, what's causing that trouble in central Queensland is climate change and the shutdown of the old industries, and we have to have a plan not just to transition away from fossil fuels, but to make sure people have jobs as that happens, skills, opportunities. The choice is between Malcolm Turnbull, who won't deliver that, and Bill Shorten, who will.
Okay, I'm going to Nick Xenophon, and just the principle from this side anyway is at the end of the mining boom, shouldn't have more mining. What do you say?
Coal mining.
Coal mining,
coal mining,
iron ore mining, gas
we're
mining.
talking about coal mining here, specifically about coal.
Yeah.
No, but
So you're happy with iron ore mining and
no one's suggesting we shut down the iron ore industry.
Okay.
I mean,
that's
a ridiculous proposition.
Just checking.
We blew... we blew the mining boom. We blew it. We should have had a sovereign wealth fund. We should have been able to cushion ourselves from these shocks. Politicians hate saying this. I don't know the answer, but I know that Suzanne Grant, who's running on my team for the Senate in Queensland, I think she's going to come and visit you very soon. So if I can get your details, I mean, this needs dialogue, this needs consensus, and we need to find the funds so these communities don't wither and die.
Jackie Lambie.
First of all, I just want to make it quite clear when it comes to all this U-Butte clean energy stuff that when it comes to Germany, they're paying double the price we are for our power. That's the first thing. And their base load, when their wind isn't, their turbines aren't turning, they get their base load energy from France, which is nuclear energy. So that's how that operates. Just so we're all quite clear. You need to have. I'll tell you what needs to go on. The same thing as what needs to be in Tasmania. We need to look at payroll tax and making that exempt outside the city areas. We need lower energy costs, obviously, and our dairy. First thing that we could do tomorrow is put a 50% a litre levy on our milk so our dairy farmers survive in this country. And you know what? I had Barnaby Joyce telling one of his staffers telling the National Dairy Products Manager today to shut up and not say anything about what Barnaby's offering, because what Barnaby's offering will only help about 3,000 over the 6,000 farmers out there. That's all it's going to help. So you know what? His alternative of helping our dairy farmers is not an option. So let's get real here. Let's put 50 cents a litre levy on our milk. That's the first thing we can do tomorrow.
All right, I'm going to quickly go back to Steve Chobo. Listen to this. You're a Queenslander. You've come from northern Queensland, but there's people out there really suffering.
Sure.
So just in 30 seconds, how big is the commitment from your government to fixing that?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to repeat myself. I outlined what we're going to do. It's about a transitioning economy. It's about providing opportunities for additional mining investment, but also in tourism, in reskilling, in training. We're putting money on the table to do all of these things. And I mean, Richard made a comment about no more coal mines. Well, you know what? What he means is no new coal mines in Australia, because global demand for coal is still going through the roof.
That's what.
So when Richard sits there and says, "Hang on," when you sit there and say you're going to save the reef, what you're actually saying is you don't want it in Australia. You want it to be done elsewhere in the world,
not at all.
Still emitting CO2, and in fact emitting higher levels of CO2 than you get in Australia.
Okay.
That's not going to save the reef.
All right.
It might make you feel good, but it's not going to actually make a difference.
I'm sorry we're over time. Sorry about that. That's all we have time for tonight. Please thank our panel, Terry Butler, Richard Di Natale, Nick Xenophon, Steve Chobo and Jackie Lambie. And our thanks to the Brisbane Powerhouse's great audience. Please give yourselves a quick round of applause. Oh, that's a polite round of applause for yourselves. Don't worry about it. Next Monday Q&A will turn the focus to regional Australia, and Barnaby Joyce indeed will be able to answer some of those questions when we broadcast live from Tamworth with the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Agriculture and local member for New England, Barnaby Joyce. Country Independent, Tony Windsor, who wants to topple Mr Joyce in New England. Labor spokesman for Agricultural and Rural Affairs, Joel Fitzgibbon. The Vice President of the National Farmers Federation, Fiona Simpson. The rural businesswoman, Robbie Sefton, opposition leader. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. We've got a pause there. That's it for that panel. Opposition leader Bill Short, and I should add, has agreed to appear on Q&A in 2 weeks' time. We've also invited the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, and we're waiting for his confirmation. Till next week, good night.